Well, clearly, different countries that used to be part of the so-called Soviet bloc followed very different paths of democratization. And we can clearly see that there are different sort of subgroups with the Visegrad group, which is Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. There are the Baltic states, there are sort of the Western Soviet successor states, such as Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova. And we clearly have seen very many differences in terms of the kind of political regimes they got, the kind of relationships that evolved with the European Union, the membership perspective, the lack of membership perspective. There's a huge variety. By now, we're more than 2 decades into this process. There's a huge variety with clearly Poland being sort of the beacon of democracy, not only domestically, but also increasingly promoting democratization around the world and in its immediate neighborhood specifically. With, on the other side of the spectrum, Belarus, being termed as the last dictatorship in Europe for quite a few years now and not showing signs of sort of democratic success, democratic improvement. So I suppose the lesson over these years is that, there isn't really a clear linear path of political transformation, that this is a very difficult process, and you're very likely to get a lot of sort of variety and very divergent outcomes. Well, I think an interesting development that we have seen happening around the world over the last 20 years is that as with the recent waves of democratization, the number of autocracies around the world decreased, it didn't lead to the increase in the number of democracies. So what we have seen is the kind of expansion of this gray zone of otherwise very different kinds of regimes, very incoherent kind of category of regimes that are neither democracies nor autocracies. And this is what scholars usually refer to as hybrid regimes. And these are the regimes that combine characteristics that are common of democracies, such as multi-party system or regular elections, yet have serious failings on other kind of criteria, such as the rule of law, on different civic and political liberties. Indeed, many scholars have shown that some of the elements that we associate with democracy are actually easier to establish in the shorter term, whereas such as elections, whereas others, such as rule of law, take longer also because these are the kinds of democratic features that depend on deeper structural factors. And so, in a way, what we have learned by now is that we shouldn't be really thinking that the moment an autocratic regime falls down, all sorts of illiberal elements that go with it just fade away together with the ruling elite that is being ousted during the transition period. So again, this is sort of a more complex process than what we've been assuming. Well, clearly, hybridity problem, as we have just described it, poses a challenge. And many donors, many political actors who are engaged in international cooperation and democracy promotion are clearly discouraged by this. Yet at the same time, I think understanding this problem helps pinpoint the most relevant and the higher impact kind of modes of engagement. And there are several things I think that have to be kept in mind. One is that there's a difficult balance to strike between sort of shorter-term crisis management, because these are clearly very fragile states because of the kind of economic, social, political price that is being paid for the complex challenges of transition. Yet at the same time, these kind of short-term interventions cannot be successful without a longer-term strategy that is being developed alongside. And the longer-term strategy has to keep in mind this whole issue of the necessity of working on the structural problems and the kind of state-society relations, and trying to sort of to push for deeper democratization of these societies. And so what we have seen as a fairly problematic tendency is that many donors prefer to work on state institutions, to work a lot with the political leadership. But what we can see is that this is not probably going to enough to really create more longer-term and more convincing democratization in these countries. So there has to be engagement with the society directly. There has to be engagement on more levels. there have to be ongoing contacts, long-term contacts on the level of regions, on the level of cities. Private actors have to be engaged. Civil society has to be engaged again in a broader sense, not only sort of the well-known NGOs, but also sort of broader spectrum of civic actors that could be engaged and encouraged to work with their counterparts in the transatlantic community.